high. I have a couple of negative observations about the market, and let me share them with you. Can crypto go down? Before I start, let me clarify my position. I bought Ethereum, and I was one of those who got caught in the bull trap. Right here, notice how well Ethereum was holding below the 200-day moving average, and how clearly the resistance level was defined. Here it is, marked by the green zone. Once it's broken through and the price consolidates above it, the price should shoot up vertically. In other words, this is just a step before taking off to an all-time high. So here we had the bottom. The bottom was clearly and obviously broken. Also here, the key zone was highlighted, where I initially bought in. Then I sold, I think, right here during the false breakout of the resistance. When it failed to break through at the trend reversal, I sold here and then bought back in. And what happened next? The key resistance level was broken on the 10th of June. This coincided with the breakout in Bitcoin. Take a look at what was happening here. All-time high. At the all-time high, there's a descending triangle. You can see it on the hourly chart. I'll show you. Here it is, the descending triangle at the all-time high. This is a very serious bearish signal. At an all-time high, the price should be shooting up vertical. If it's just standing still, that's already a negative sign. Not to mention the formation of descending setups. And here's a descending setup with a trendline break to the downside and a break below the key 106,800 zone. So what happens next? Next, on the 10th or actually, even a day before that, on June 9th, the price once again breaks through the key resistance level at 106,800. This is a very bullish signal and it needs to be taken seriously. In other words, at this point, you could have already written off the market, especially since there was a retest of that 106,800 level. A bounce from it, and anyone could tell me that the price downtrend, bear market, but after a V-shaped reversal, the key resistance level was broken. After that, the price should have shot up to an all-time high again. That is, right here, it should have shot up vertically. Here, when it broke through, it should have soared straight up. And the breakout happened to coincide with the breakout in Ethereum, but what actually happened? The market didn't care at all about any of these key moves. In other words, this moment should have led to a long, drawn-out bear trend. But that didn't happen. The fact that this didn't happen and that the price broke through the key resistance should have already led to an all-time high and continued growth, and that didn't happen either. So at the very least, the market has changed since the time we were trading here, and it's changed for the worse. That is, back here, the market was understandable, predictable, it followed trends clearly, and when the breakout happened, it moved in the direction of the breakout, with retests and all. Even during false breakouts, it didn't hit stop losses. What's happening here now is completely unclear. However, if you take a closer look at the bigger chart and pay attention to the volumes, everything becomes much clearer. Let me show you what the market should actually look like when breaking through an all-time high. Here we had an all-time high, its breakout, and take a look at the volumes. I recommend everyone to open an account on the top exchange BingX. And here's why. First of all, they have the lowest trading fees on the market, period. And just with that, you can save quite a bit of money every month. The higher your trading volume, the more you'll save. Secondly, if you register using the link below, you'll get up to 30 USDT as a welcome bonus even without making a deposit. There are separate bonuses, up to 500 for making a deposit and up to 500 for trading volume. But even without a deposit, you get 30. My recommendation is that absolutely everyone should take advantage of this opportunity. Create an account using the link below, get a bonus of up to 30 USDT, check out the exchange and the potential savings on commissions, and then, if you wish, start trading later. But everyone should create an account. I recommend getting a bonus on the top exchange, BingX. The link is below. Register now. Watch for the breakout and check the volumes. Volumes are increasing. With increased volumes, the price shoots up vertically. This confirms the strength of the trend. If the trend is strong and volumes are rising, the price will soar vertically if it's an uptrend, or if it's a downtrend, it will fall vertically as volumes increase. This confirms the strength of the trend. And yes, here the market is strong, the trend is strong, volumes are increasing, and the price is taking off. Let's take a look at what happened when we had an all-time high without an increase in volume. Here's the moment, specifically in April 2024. The all-time high was broken, and yes, there was some volume during the breakout. Despite the increased volume, the price didn't shoot up, and then the volumes decreased. That's it. There were no more buyers, and the price stagnated. Yes, even though it stagnated here, overall, it was still in a strong bullish trend and broke the all-time high. And yes, even without high volumes, it still managed to break the all-time high again. But what's happening now? Take a look. Are these really volumes? Is this really volume? Well, there's some volume here, something's present, right? Compared to what we saw in the summer of 2023 at the bottom. Back then there was almost none, but compared to previous all-time highs, compared to previous cyclical volumes, it's practically non-existent. Moreover, right here, There was a vertical surge and some spike in volume. That was still more or less okay, still more or less good. A breakout of the all-time high, an increase in volume, a vertical surge, then we stall, forming something like a double top, and the volume decreases. When the double top breaks down, the volume continues to decline. Here, it seems like we updated the all-time high, but there was no increase in volume at all. There are simply no buyers. There's just no one to buy. Yes, for some reason the seller hasn't shown up yet. That is, during all the time that Bitcoin was trading here, here and here, a huge amount of Bitcoin is in the market, held by people, and they're not ready to sell yet. They'll be ready to sell either, most likely when they see a vertical surge like this and lock in their huge profits, or when they're absolutely sure the trend has changed and they'll start exiting, taking profits, or cutting losses if they bought right at the top. This is called a flash crash, when everyone in the market suddenly realizes the trend has shifted, they all start exiting en masse, FUD and panic set in, and a flash crash occurs. This is exactly what leads to these kinds of drops on vertical drop, then another. And the zone from which a decline could start is $73,000. If the price suddenly falls here and breaks through, everyone who is in the market who bought in here will start selling. Right now, there is no seller. How can you tell that there is no seller right now? If there is low volume, it means there is little selling and little buying. People are buying. At the same time, the market is rising. Meanwhile, a huge amount of Bitcoin is in people's hands already bought up, and if they are selling little but still have something to sell, then in the event of some critical situation, they will dump en masse, and yes, something like this could happen. However, right now, this is extremely unlikely. There are currently no prerequisites for this. Before mass panic and FUD begin, the price should slowly slide down to the support levels. What could trigger this? Well, either a complete lack of buyers, if volumes drop even further, or maybe it could be some extremely negative news, which I don't exactly disbelieve, but I don't trade based on news. But as for slow stagnation, that's quite possible. Let's take a look at what's happening right now at this moment. So, okay. We figured out the volumes, we figured out the reason why the price isn't shooting up vertically. There's no one to buy. Basically, everyone who wanted to buy in is already in the market. They've bought in and are now waiting for other participants, for someone else to come in and start buying up vertically. And accordingly, the idea is, I'm so smart, I'll sell there. But it turns out there's no one to buy. Take note, this is already a red flag. At that moment, yes, the price broke through our key level of 106,800. The market doesn't care about that at all. In other words, it didn't shoot up vertically, the buyer didn't show up here. Here we have stagnation, look. Stagnation's quite possible. And this is after breaking through the key zone, the market is just stagnating. If the stagnation turns out to be strong enough and approaches some key support levels, it's quite possible that this will trigger a drop. Also consider this, if Bitcoin is digital gold, if institutions are buying Bitcoin now, if Bitcoin ETFs have been launched, and in general Bitcoin is hyped up right now, and at the same time the US stock market is also rising, not at an all-time high of course, but close to it. So what's happening with altcoins? In other words, with all this hype around Bitcoin, there's no one left to buy it. So what's left for altcoins then? There's absolutely nothing left for altcoins, just look, many coins are at their all-time lows. And by the way, here's how the market works. If a coin that's already at its all-time low breaks through that all-time low, here's an example from the past. All-time low, a squeeze down to the bottom, and then a true breakdown. After the breakdown, the price calmly drops another 50%. And right now, many coins are exactly at their all-time lows. A slight dip downward and they'll all drop another 50% across the board. Not all coins, I want to emphasize, are at their all-time lows. Some still have a bottom lower than the current price, and some have rising lows. There are very rare situations where it seems like the price of a coin is significantly above its all-time low. But first of all, this mostly applies to top coins. Secondly, this situation is quite rare. Out of the non-top altcoins, probably the only shitcoin that's at least somewhat bouncing off the bottom here is Fun. But that's literally the only case, the only one. Everything else is at the bottom, and this proves that there's simply no one to buy. Well, Pep is still holding up pretty well, more or less, but there's no buyer. If there's no buyer, there are two scenarios. Either one shows up, and then a new question arises where from. If the key levels were already broken right before our eyes recently and no buyer appeared, where would one come from? And the second scenario, if a seller comes in and if a big seller comes in, the price will drop significantly and correct itself. Now, let's get back to Ethereum. I was in a position on Ether. I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, because right here the market was very strong. It was supposed to take off. There, even Bitcoin is breaking through a key resistance zone, a buyer should appear, and Ether is also breaking out above resistance, step by step, yes. So we had a downtrend, an impulse, and then we stopped. Here is step one, we stopped, a consolidation, a kind of bullish setup, with a squeeze towards resistance. This is called a bullish flag. A breakout of the bullish flag to the upside. Technically, we should be taking off. But no, the market doesn't care at all. And moreover, it didn't just make a false breakout, it dropped, did another retest, and then made a real breakout. No, actually it broke through the bottom and changed the trend. Well, here the question is how to draw the trend line. Yeah, for example, I drew it in a way that's at least somewhat reasonable, so you can see something positive here. Something like this, if you draw the trend line, it looks like we bounced off it, but in reality, what's happening here? Here's our pattern, here are our patterns, a breakdown of the pattern to the downside, a retest of the key resistance zone. And actually, at moments like this, you need to exit the market. I exited the market maybe a bit early. I was a little hasty because ideally you should look at a smaller time frame and only exit if this retest actually acts as resistance or retest stand. Only if after the retest, the local support zone is broken. There's even a kind of head and shoulders pattern here, with a clear level at 2390. You can exit when that level is broken. I exited a bit earlier, because I saw there was no buyer at all. The altcoin market is at the bottom. Ethereum is the best coin on the market right now. I've already shown the chart of Ethereum's ratio to other alts several times. Here it is. It was at the bottom of the 2018 level. Ethereum was very weak compared to other alts. This was generally visible on this chart as well, just a relentless drop from $4,000 down to $1,400. But right here, after forming a bottom, some demand for Ethereum started to appear. After all, Ethereum is digital silver. There is also an ETF for Ethereum. With Ethereum, unlike Bitcoin, there is no longer any significant inflation. That is, while Bitcoins are still being minted, there are only 21 million in total, but they are still being produced. Mining still exists, and new coins are still being minted. With Ethereum, if you look at it well, of course new coins are also being minted, but they're being burned in roughly the same amount. So when Ethereum switched to proof of stake, you can look at its issuance, it's barely increasing at all. In other words, if Bitcoin will eventually stop being minted at some point in the future, Ethereum has basically already stopped being minted now. To be more precise, it is still being minted, but it's being burned in roughly the same amount. But fundamentally, the total number of coins isn't increasing, so in theory there shouldn't be any inflation. So fundamentally, it's even stronger than Bitcoin, and that's how it looks. Here we see a change in the local trend, a retest of the resistance level, and a clear technical breakout. Well, this is not typical for a strong market. In a strong market, it's not typical for altcoins to be lingering near their lows, especially altcoins near their all-time lows. This is not typical for a strong market. In a strong market, it's not typical to see a lack of volume at the highs, and stagnation at the highs is also not characteristic of a strong market. All of this is not typical for a strong market and is very dangerous. It's very dangerous to be in the market right now, especially in altcoins. Bitcoin, as digital gold, as an asset that for some reason people aren't selling, is still hovering near its all-time highs on declining volumes. Here it's still more or less safe, because, well, maybe a buyer will come in, I don't know, maybe something will happen, maybe the masses will suddenly get some money and start buying up Bitcoin, I don't know. So such a scenario is possible, but still I think it's less likely right now than the scenario where people open their eyes and start dumping the volumes they've accumulated earlier. The chart of altcoins points to this. The chart of the strongest altcoin, Ethereum, which bounced off the bottom, it seems like a perfect entry point. No matter how you draw a downtrend here, every downtrend has been broken. The local downtrend was broken back here, and the more global one here. All the key downward moving averages have been broken to the upside. There's even some rounding of the trend here. As soon as it seemed we broke out of the downtrend against the dollar, technically it actually signals an exit point, and there's no demand for crypto, so be careful. There's a high probability that if Bitcoin starts to stagnate, the altcoins that are already pressed to the bottom could drop another 50%. And in fact, stagnation could easily happen. Yes, here's one instance, here's another. All of this is called stagnation. It might not necessarily lead to a downtrend for Bitcoin, but then again, it will depend on whether those already in the market start selling off and exiting en masse. We only see this when we approach key support levels. Until then, there will most likely be stagnation, with a 90% probability, and then we'll be wondering whether the sellers will show up or not. In short, be careful. The outlook for 2025 is as follows. Right now it's summer, the end of June, and then we'll have July and August. And let me remind you, August is the weakest month for the crypto market. Do you remember the saying? Sell in May and go away. Historically, markets tend to grow well from October to May, but from May to October, not so much. And ahead is the month of August, where a lot of blood could be spilled. Be careful and good luck.